Well, good morning again, and this is an exciting thought and a concept to discuss with all of you present over here. This phrase of Industry 4.0 has been with us for a few couple of years now. It pops up in different ways in policy discussions at industrial forums. But what exactly is this? It's for those of you who are not very familiar, it's really an umbrella term which describes a set of technologies from IoT to blockchain to usage of drones, neuroscience, precision medicine, and how that can be applied in the Indian context. The panelists I have with me are practitioners and advisors who work very deeply with not just enterprises in India, but also government bodies. I'm going to begin by requesting Mohan to set the tone in terms of defining what Industry 4.0 is and why is it so relevant for India. Mohan, may I request you to begin?
Okay, let me explain, Pranjal. Industry 1.0 was the industrial revolution, the steam engine which replaced human power and animal power. We saw a dramatic change, the rise of Europe, the rise of the machine age. Industry 2.0 was the assembly line of Henry Ford. Till then, people stood in a place, people went to different places and fitted components and everything else. Now, in the assembly line, you had the assembly line moving, people stood still, and you got the parts and you put it, you became a widget. And that dramatically increased productivity. It also expanded the supply chain because then you had sub-assemblies and assemblies coming from all over the place. Now, Industry 3.0 was the CNC machine and PLC machines where you had these machines which are automated to some great extent, and the machines could work by themselves with a human controller, so you didn't have to set every part, you had to program the machine, and the machine cut the part or whatever it is. Now, in Industry 4.0, the entire chain gets automated. It means you have robots doing the work on the shop floor, and the robots make sure that every part is assembled, the welding happens, everything else happens, the paint shops work in automobile factory, and then your entire dealer network and the entire supply chain is networked together using IoT and ERP. It means the front end and the back end. The front end being the sales is done either directly or through dealers, and the entire system is updated depending upon the sale for the particular day and the forecast for the next day. Now that is fed into the production line, where the production line makes sure that you have smaller batches, bespoke batches. I'm giving an auto example, bespoke batches based upon data, so that you can have smaller runs and very flexible output, dramatically changing just-in-time manufacturing to do that. And at the back end, you have series of sensors in the manufacturing plant to make sure that the parts come on time, the parts go on time, there is quality improvement, everything else. So what you see is a level of automation that has gone up maybe 5x with robotics, with AI, with predictive analysis, right from the consumer. If you want to give a prime example, look at Tesla. The entire factory floor is robotic, sale is direct, and the car is gone ahead to become a piece of software. So the data about the car and the use of the car comes to Tesla every single day. And you know where the car is, how the car is running, every single car. And in case of a crisis, you can send a software patch and change the contours of the car, as happened in Puerto Rico, where they change the design to make sure the speed is cut and the batteries have a longer life. So Industry 4.0 is automation to an extreme chain in the supply chain, in the surround system, and in the heart of the manufacturing plant. I'm giving an auto example because I think that's the easiest to understand.
One quick question and a short answer. Is it relevant for India?
Very relevant. India is going to win. And I'll discuss why when you ask me more questions.
Okay, excellent. That's a great start. Akhil, you've worked on these subjects with global corporations in India, with Indian multinationals as well as small and startup companies. Do you see excitement around these changes, or do you see anxiety? And what is then your advice to them?
Yeah. Thanks, Pranjal. And I think, as Mohan rightly put, that it is very relevant. Before I come to anxiety part of it, let me put my perspective of why it is so relevant for India. If we look at what Mohan described as Industrial Revolution 1, 2, 3, if you go to that history, you will realize that whichever country participated in or early participated in those industrial revolution, they became the world leader right after that industrial revolution. So if India has this dream of being the third largest economy, if not more, of a $10 trillion dollar economy by 2030, India has no option but to not only participate, but be the front runner as far as the Industrial Revolution 4.0 is concerned. There are also three aspects why it is relevant from India's context. India, if you look at the Industrial Revolution 4, it is mainly led by the technology disruption. And thanks to the steps we took after the Industrial Revolution 3, we came up with companies like TCS, Infosys, where Mohan was a co-founder, or a HCL, or a Wipro, and many like that. We created the proximity to technology as far as India is concerned. And on the other hand, I don't know the reason why it happened, but it did happen that all the offshoring started coming to India. Lakhs of people are doing offshoring in India, which is also driven by technology. So if you ask me, India has an unfair advantage of being close to technology and technological development in the country. And there is no reason not to capitalize on that, rather than saying, oh, all the offshoring business will go up from India. That's one of the anxiety people have across the world, that, oh, once we have the robots and we have the machine answering the call centers and machine doing the work, we would not need Indian offshore center. But my point of view is that we already have an advantage, and how do we put RPAs, and how do we put analytics, and how we put virtual and augmented reality, and make the offshore centers in India more attractive than anybody developing it in the US or Germany or UK, and make it actually happen for India. The two other aspects which also make India very solid for Industrial 4.0 is, one is, we all know that million people joining workforce every month, and of course I'm not counting the feminization of jobs which will happen, or people, when agriculture get more efficient, more and more people will come from agriculture to non-agriculture. These people has to be gainfully engaged. I'm not talking about job creation, and we heard Mr. Gadkari yesterday, about creation of jobs vis-a-vis creation of engagement. Now, whether it is alliance, it is startup, it is business, they have to be gainfully engaged into this. And therefore, there is a need for India to be front runner in industrial revolution. So if you look at from that perspective, and of course, one of the big reason why it is so relevant for India, with 1.3 or 1.4, whatever the number of population is, you cannot stop consumption. And when the consumption is growing, India will be almost 20% of consumption of everything you do. I mean, today, there is so much of opportunity because our consumption is so low, other than the data where we have become the #1 in data consumption across the world. But other than that, our consumption is still low. When that consumption grows up, you don't want to be in the scenario the US is, where consumption is far more than the production, and then you are fighting a geopolitical battle with China to put some trade barriers and all those things. You don't want to be in that scenario. They might as well produce in India to a large extent and equal the consumption. Therefore, it is relevant.
I'll come back to you on issues of how the industry is trying to make up for this challenge and what the transition is. Ravi, in your experience as the head of ABB and then at Jindal Steel and in your own startup now, it's important to understand that the creation of Industry 4.0, the foundations were laid in an environment and a culture which is not relevant perhaps for a highly populous country like India. Today, what is it that will help India leverage technology at the same time mitigating the negative impact of making perhaps a lot of professionals not so relevant?
I think the technologies which are getting developed worldwide is a universal phenomenon, and it's actually moving in a certain direction. Any country, including India, which wants to be part of the global ecosystem, it cannot remain isolated from what's happening in the rest of them. The compulsions for us to adopt the...
Can you keep it closer?
Yeah. The compulsions for us to adopt the Industrial Revolution 4 technologies may be different, and so are they for United States, Japan. Actually, if you look at it, the biggest trigger for the introduction of the industry technology 4 is coming from developed countries, whether United States, Japan, and Western Europe, because these countries have compulsion that they have an aging society. They don't have young people as we have, and they still want to maintain their one-upmanship when it comes to their position economically. So therefore, they obviously wanted to go for technologies which are less people-intensive, and therefore you see so much of automation. And along with the automation has also come many other applications where there has been a lot of confluence of different technologies covering the physical, biological, and digitization, which we talked so much about yesterday. So that is, the ones who are driving these technologies. But a country like India, we also have to get integrated with this. We have no option. But my own feeling is that it's going to be very good for India. We have to do our own context setting, because the technologies which are available under the Industry Revolution 4 are really going to bring millions and millions of our people into the national economic stream. And as a matter of fact, information is power. With the advent of internet, the advent of mobile phones, you can imagine the people that we would have never reached. Today, they have access to what's happening in the country. So it is empowerment of people. And just imagine, as we sit here, if there were no mobile phones, if there was no internet, millions and millions of our people would have remained totally cut off from what's happening in the mainstream. So I think, extending the same logic as we go forward, I think we have to let these technologies come. We only have to see how best we can adapt it to our advantage. I think that's the only question. We always have anxiety whenever things are developed, saying that, how is it going to affect people? When the first computer was done, there were so many worries that it's going to render so many people unemployed, and so it happened. I think as time unfolds, more opportunities are going to come, which are a lot more exciting. So we just sort of make sure that these technologies are allowed to come into our system. Yesterday, the minister said very rightly, we need to make sure that we create standards, we create public platforms, whereby we can, make the best use of technologies to the the advantage of mankind here.
Thanks, Ravi. Rahul, you focus a lot on aerospace and defense industries. And India has been a laggard on this, and it's only now with this government that we've been able to open it up for private sector to expand. Do you think the new technologies can help India leapfrog and become a force to reckon with using these platforms?
Yes, I think so. And I'm unashamedly pro-Industry 4.0. There are reasons for it. And some of them are generic, but some of them are specific to aerospace defense. Industry 4.0 is not an India-specific phenomenon. It's happening everywhere in the world. Everybody's manufacturing chains are getting disrupted. It's a great opportunity for Indian industry to participate in the manufacturing value chain globally. The last disruption that happened was led by a gentleman who was sitting next to me. And look what we did. We built a very nice industrial base around it, a very nice IT ecosystem around it. We can do the same for Industry 4.0. Coming to aerospace defense, any of these industries which are discrete manufacturing, low volume manufacturing, high value add, high product value, they will significantly benefit from adopting Industry 4.0. It's a great opportunity for Indian industry to enter the aerospace value chain and displace existing suppliers.
Do you see that happening already?
I see that happening now.
Is there an example you can share?
There are enough and more players who are now, let's take an example. When you used to machine a part, an engine component, and use traditional machining, you were losing 90% of the metal. So the part-to-waste ratio was 1:9. With additive manufacturing, today the part-to-waste ratio is 1:1. So a lot of Indian manufacturers are now entering this space where they're using 3D printing to disrupt what is traditionally a very, very controlled value chain, the aero engine value chain globally. So I think there cannot be a better example than that, where Indian industry is able to enter very quickly into very well-established global value chains. And I echo Ravi's sentiment there. We should not be fearful for it. I think it's an opportunity for us to see how we can best leverage for our own benefit as a country.
But there are good reasons for fear, and I'll come to that a little later. But Mohan, we're talking about manufacturing, industrial manufacturing, but the large economic dependence on services sector in India. Now we have health tech, education tech, almost every services from aviation to logistics is being changed by technology. New options are bringing efficiencies that we have never seen. What about the services sector? Are those verticals in a position to make the most of it yet? What do you see?
Of course. I mean, look, Pranjal, the IT service sector, one of them, is the forefront of Industry 4.0 globally and forefront of automation, forefront of AI. If somebody tells you the sector is not using AI, they're going to lose their jobs, they're out of their mind.
But
they don't know what they're talking.
Can I provoke you?
Yes, please.
Okay. IT sector in India, and you've been part of it, is actually facing a threat because it's not being able to move to AI-based solutions. Now, that's one sector which is under threat, but there are opportunities in another sector. How do you think IT sector will transform?
I think the threat is only in your mind. I'll tell you why. You must understand one thing. This sector is leading the change in their clients. They know what is happening. They're leading the change. They're providing the change. All right, they're not under threat of anything because what is happening at the edge is what they're doing. And when they're doing what is happening there, they're driving the innovation, they're leading, they're not under threat because the new jobs are coming to them.
But I think the revenues of the sector,
please.
only few percentage, 5 or 10% is based on AI today.
Yeah, I mean, AI revenue will take 10 years to become 30, 40%. It's not going to be very big. It's an algorithm, all right? The services component will be very, very large. But the important thing to understand is this is an industry-leading sector. This is not a legacy sector. And their work has got automated for the last 10 years, year by year by year, and they're leading. You'll be very surprised. 50% of American large companies still use a mainframe. Come on, change doesn't come in industry and large animals very fast, right? JP Morgan spends $5 billion on IT. They got 15 disparate data systems which have to be linked together and run. It's a nightmare, and this nightmare can only be managed by people who understand that nightmare and
so
do very well.
So from mainframe to cloud, that is an opportunity as well.
There's an opportunity, but the shift is 10%, 15%, it's not 100%. Then let us talk about Industry 4.0, why I think India will succeed. Look, you need an economy which is not demand constrained. India is not demand constrained. We now have a national market because of GST, okay? It's a national market. Our cost of logistics, the 14% will come down to 6 to 7% because we have a national market. Then we have the IT skills and the technology skills in abundance in this country to make the transition. So we are not a country starved of IT and technology to automate, get in IoT and do everything else. Next, for IoT, we need to get those devices. The cost of devices have come down so dramatically. China can supply to us for the rest of the world. We don't have to manufacture because the cost has come down. Or we can do some of the most sophisticated software setting. For example, in the embedded chip, the embedding of the design itself is very, very expensive. The chip has become very low cost because of certain instances. So we can do the design. Now, in Industry 4.0, there will be very distributed manufacturing. Now, Industry 3.0 was centralized manufacturing, distributed. Like he said, if you use 3D printing, imagine, look at, I don't want to take away Ravi's thunder, he'll tell you. Now, look at this. I want a car. So I go to a designer in Bangalore, he designs a car in 3D for me, bespoke the way I want. All right? And then I go to my neighboring shop, which is next door to me. He's got a 3D printing machine. He'll print out the entire car for me. You think it's not there? It's there. So you can have a distributed network all over the country where metal powder and plastic powder can come, and this can be used. So we have the design, we have this. So we have to rethink, we have to do it massively. Now, India had a disadvantage so far in manufacturing because we are not part of the global supply chain. Now, the global supply chain is getting disrupted. Because the global supply chain is getting disrupted because it is becoming very expensive, and you can have direct selling B2C immediately, bespoke, in a moment's notice, instead of long chains. That is point number one. Second, we needed capital. Now, India has opened up, capital is flowing to countries where there's a huge demand. There is a shortage of supply. And India is also getting capital in big companies. And third, we needed the skilled labor. This required lesser skilled labor. So the labor laws don't apply. The labor laws are, reforming labors are figment of the mind. The biggest steel company has laid off 40,000 people without going through labor laws, and I don't know what this hula bula is. Sudhir will tell you how people work. It works. You understand? If you look at all this, we are right. But what is the key? The key is our industry should accept it, assimilate it, and go for it. We need a pool of risk capital. We need India's SoftBank. We need a pool of capital which will take risk, invest in all this Existing companies, give them a little bit of capital and tell them to fight the battle. We need a grand strategy for Industry 4.0.
So I'm going to ask you, who's going to do this?
Ravi will do it, he will do it, I'll do it, you will do it. It's being
So
done.
we are establishing this, and
Yeah,
I think
I mean, if you
AIMA
say who is going to do it, I will ask Sudhi to have a workforce to team to do it and lead us for India. Sudhi?
You know, friends, you're seeing history in the making. We are getting ready to set the blueprint for a grand strategy for India, and I think that's a great beginning. AIMA should lead it for sure. If I could come to you, Akhil, the hurdles for transition, you know, investment in existing technologies, which you have to let go of for enterprises and move to the new ones. Investment in the people, which have been trained for a certain level of skills and outcomes and work, which is not going to be relevant anymore. Now, when enterprises come to you for advice, what do you tell them? What do you tell them on how to make the transition? How can there be a business case for leaving whatever they've invested in and making fresh investments?
So when you look at the entire revolution, it's happening. It's already happening, and it will continue to happen for some time to come. It's not something which is done overnight, but speed is important in this revolution. And I say speed is important because if you again go back to the history of industrial revolution, the first revolution happens after centuries of existence in this world. The second one happened within 125 to 150 years of the first one. The third one happened in 70 years. The fourth one is happening in 25 to 30 years. So I'm worried in 10 years from now, and it would be within my lifetime, we will be talking about Industrial Revolution 5. And I don't know what it would look like, but there would be something within the next 10 to 15 years. So this is a Kal Chakra which is going on, and you need to adapt as soon as possible.
Is that proving to be difficult for companies in India to adapt quickly? That agility is what is sometimes difficult for senior leadership to manage?
So that's the mindset change. And if you look at, we talked about what's the anxiety about. And I was, when Ravi was talking, I was remembering that example which I have talked about many times, when many of us would remember when computerization was happening in Indian railways, there was a huge ruckus that if ticketing is done on computerization, then a lot of people will either lose their job or their eyesight will be affected. Now, God knows when we move from computerization of ticketing to online ticketing to and something else, and you know, there are more jobs in Indian Railways than there were before. So there are anxiety, and it's a mindset change which is required to make the shift. It is not about the timing. It is, if you want to make the change, start today. And that's what we tell our clients. You don't have to wait for the change to take place. Either you create the change or you follow the change. And if you want to create the change, then start thinking it now. There is no right timing as far as change is concerned.
That's a good point. Ravi, I know Mohan stole your thunder, but I'm going to come to you on this point. This mindset change and ability of senior leadership to invest in the future. You know, there is also this view that because the senior leadership is at the end of their career, they don't really see the point in investing in the future. And it's a bit of that Brexit problem, you know, where the young people want to stay, but the old people are, you know, stuck in the 1960s thinking. And it's a huge risk effort as well. Is Indian corporate leadership and management prepared for this change, which is going to be the fastest, as Akhil said, it has to be done in the fastest time cycle possible?
I don't think there's any option left to the management for those companies which want to survive, want to grow. I think, you know, the pressure, the relentless pressure from competition is so huge that only for a short period that you could, you know, defend your position by approaching the governments, their intervention, etc. You know, so, being a person in the industry, I noticed many times the Indian industrialists, they go up to the government to seek their intervention by way of barriers against imports, etc. This is not a long-term solution. I think the best thing is that they should learn to be competitive. And there, it's very important that they adopt the best high productivity methods, including automation to the extent it's required. You know, we have to see, time and again, you could always have short phases where countries build barriers around themselves like being done in the US at the moment, but they're not going to last long. We have to come to terms with the fact that we're part of a global economy, free trading world community, and we have to be relevant in that one. So therefore, any agenda that we set for an enterprise has to be done keeping this in mind. Anything that will help you to be competitive, more productive, I think we simply have to adopt it. Those managements which do not take to this kind of positioning, I don't think they're going to last very long. But fortunately, I find that many companies are very aware of this. They are absolutely live to the fact that they have to adopt new technologies, and it's happening in India. Maybe it has to gather momentum. So I think when we talk about Industry 4.2, another thing which is very relevant is any decision we take, we should not take just keeping Indian market in mind. I think anything that we do must be globally relevant, because just a matter of time, I mean, I was amazed to see how Chinese steel producers, that they were producing the steel which was about 25 to 30% cheaper, and the Indian steel producer ran to the government saying that please erect the barriers and defend our position. But how long? It's not going to happen. So I think it's just as well that we look internally and see how we can shore up the efficiency of what we do. So I think there's always a concern about if we take to automation to its final end, is going to make many people irrelevant, and the skill obsolescence will take place, people will be rendered unemployed. I think there are many new avenues which are going to happen. For a start, think your market position is going to be stronger. You can go for much bigger distribution, much bigger volume. That by itself is going to bring you more opportunities. There's no dearth of opportunities. So let's not be fearful about the impact of the technologies could have on the employment side. We'll find the way forward as we go, as we have done historically. Time is a testimony to that.
You want to add, Akhil?
Can I come on
the
topic of anxiety you talked about earlier? And I'm so glad to see that all four of us are so optimistic about about this. But just as a counterpoint, there are 4 or 5 aspects of this industrial revolution, whether it is capital formation, whether it's technology, disruption, research, whether it is government policies and creating infrastructure. We are doing pretty good job in that, and there are a number of examples in each one of them. Then, of course, there are a lot more to be done, but we are at least in the right direction. One thing which is not unfounded, the reason for that anxiety is if you look at the Indian demographics, we have a huge amount of young people, but if you analyze that population a little deeper, number of engineers who are coming up, is every engineer hireable? Answer is more often than not, they're not hireable. So while they're getting a degree, but the kind of degree or education they are getting, is that useful for industry as of now, let alone the industry 4.0? Secondly, if you look at the workforce, less than 5% of Indian workforce is skilled labor. While if you compare it to Korea, which is the other extreme at about 96%, or even China, which is 24%. So that is one area. While we are working on it, we cannot afford to spend 10 years on that. You
Absolutely.
need to get that right. I mean, whether it is online training or this mass open courses which are available, that is one area where we need the speed to be a little faster than it is today.
That's a brilliant point, Akhil. Let's take a fact check. How many people in the audience feel that they have the requisite skills and competence for Industry 4.0? Please raise your hands. Excellent. And which means that 99% of the people feel that they should go in for learning. So let me again see a show of hands. How many would like to do another course or improve the academic qualifications and skill qualifications? Excellent. That is the optimism, and that's the kind of mindset change that we're really looking for. Rahul, do you think that this investment in skills, because the word I would like to use these days is not skills but relevance. How do you ensure that each institution and each individual is relevant to the change? And here the relevance cycle is changing every 6 months. Just because you studied something 25 years ago, obviously that's not relevant anymore, but even something that you studied for a mid-career course 6 months ago, maybe that's also not relevant, or 6 years ago. Investment in skill building for every level of a person who's employed in an organization. We all talk about blue collar, but white collar from early stage to senior management. Do you see transition happening, that enterprises investing in the skilling and upskilling of people?
I'll answer to that, but first I want to answer a case study on the last topic. Real case study. We were advising an Indian firm, which is 3 years into defense manufacturing, competing on a global tender, in which it was competing against American, European, Korean, and Israeli firms, the youngest of which was 20 years into that system, manufacturing. The solution was, the system is deployed on the border, and the bid was being evaluated on life cycle cost. This Indian firm went and said, instead of supplying spares, we'll supply you a 3D printer, which can be deployed on the border. You know what was the life cycle cost differential when the bids were opened? It was 60%. The Indian firm was cheaper by 60%, so despite having an age disadvantage of 15 years or 10 years, despite having very little credentials to prove, it was still able to win a global tender. And this also proves one more point, which Ravi was saying. In this automation business, 10 years back when you went to a supply chain guy, he said, listen, quality is given, let's talk about price. Today they say, listen, automation is given, let's talk about price. So it's not something that's still a question. Now coming to this question of skills which you raised. The same question about, if you would have asked the same question about Industry 4.0, but split it by parameters, and you would have said, how many people know about robotics? You would have had a different show of hands. You would have had a higher show of hands. So I think this Industry 4.0 term needs to be demystified in that sense. It's a larger term. But coming to the question that you asked, I think there is a need for both private initiative as well as public initiative. When I joined industry, I got education which meant that I should be employable till the time I retire. Children who join school today will retire in 2075, they will have to be skilled for that. Are they skilled for that? No. I think the initiative lies with people. All of us individually will have to realize we will be out of jobs if we don't plan on reinvesting in our own skills. So the answer does not lie only with an input which comes from the firm or from the government. The answer also lies in your own private initiative, in investing your own self.
That's important, because everybody is now responsible for ensuring their own relevance, and I think that's a very key point to take away from this discussion. Please join me in thanking the panel. I think we've had a fantastic thought leadership here. The only thought I'll leave with you is that for preparing for industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, I think the journey and the change begins from ourselves. So let us put ourselves at the center and begin the change. Thank you so much.